Okay, welcome everyone. We are just waiting a moment till we have our panelists join us, and then I will go ahead and kick us off. Okay, perfect. Looks like we have everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So welcome everyone to the panel discussion on Bridging the Gap, AI Adoption and TMMI, Addressing Misconceptions, Enhancing Maturity, and Driving Innovation. And as AI, in particular generative AI specifically, continues to evolve, organizations are facing both immense opportunities, but at the same time, there's significant challenges that come about. And a lot of these challenges lie in integrating these technologies effectively. And so AI's potential to transform software quality, testing, and process maturity, yes, we kind of know it's here, it's kind of undeniable, but at the same time, we have misconceptions about its capabilities floating around out there. There's ethical concerns, readiness for enterprise, it's still kind of persisting out there. And so our discussion today is going to explore how AI can enhance innovation while maintaining trust, efficiency, responsible implementation, and all of those things. So we're also going to touch on how structured frameworks, like different aspects of the test maturity model integration, can help organizations develop a more disciplined approach to AI adoption, which then ensures it's evolving from experimental to optimized. And it's something that we can repeat. So we have sort of these repeatable processes that'll be started as well. So our panelists bring very diverse perspectives to this on how AI can pretty much be a game changer within testing, process improvement, decision-making. And so I'll start out with a quick intro myself, and then I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll go ahead and kick off here. So I'm Amanda Fetch. I'm a board director for TMMI North America chapter that's bringing you the conference here today. I've been working in data science, analytics, tech AI for a little over 25 years now, industry agnostic, worked in many different fields. Right now I'm focusing more on the government side of things, perhaps. About to defend my PhD studies in space situational awareness, machine learning, AI, and I'm working on clustering specifically orbital debris using DB-Scan. Now, today, our panelists, the first one I'll introduce is Kari Kakkonen, and Kari has worked in software testing for about 30 years now. He's currently working as the service owner of customer expertise development at Go4. He's a co-author of Act 2 Lead Software Testing Leadership Handbook, and he's on the board of directors at TMMI. And Julianne Averill is a healthcare AI executive, board leader with over 20 years of experience leading transformative business initiatives. She's at organizations like Deloitte, Manifest MedX, Nomura Therapeutics, currently a managing director and CFO at Danforth Advisors. She leads growth for the San Francisco region. She's advising the science companies on capital allocation and product launch strategies. And last but not least, we also have John Brewton with us. John's an executive leader with very deep expertise across operations management, digital transformation, engineering, and generative AI. He's also the founder and CEO of Data Squared USA Inc., where he still steers the company to advance cutting-edge machine learning AI solutions. And so all of us together today through the panel, we're going to address, again, key challenges. The panelists are going to reflect on their personal or their organizational experiences. We're going to work to debunk some myths here, share strategies for organizations to fully leverage AI's potential. Now, one thing I would say is I think everybody's kind of getting familiar here with the Zoho platform, but if you have questions, if we have time, we're going to try to leave some room at the end. So there is sort of on that side panel in Zoho that you can go ahead and put in the Q&A some questions if you'd like. We'll try to leave time for that and address as well. And if you want for a specific person, go ahead and maybe add that name. Otherwise, I'll go ahead if we have time at the end and present the questions to the panel. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and get to the fun stuff and dive in here. So the first question I'm going to present, and one thing I will do as well, is I'm going to actually stop sharing so we can see our faces and not focus on a slide. So we're going to start out focusing on misconceptions in AI adoption and practice. And so the first question I'd like to throw at Julianne. And Julianne, I'd love to know from your organization's perspective, What are the biggest misconceptions about AI that you've encountered, and how have these impacted your ability to implement AI initiatives?
Yes, thanks, Amanda. And it's great to be here today. And it's a good question. And what I see is two of the biggest misconceptions. The first is that AI is a silver bullet. So AI is going to fix everything. We're all going to be replaced by AI agents. It's going to create tons of efficiencies. All the data in the world is going to be amazing. We can upload it to AI tools, and out is going to pop all these amazing insights, and everything's going to be wonderful and hunky dory. In practice, what we're finding is everything in the spectrum from companies are going what people are coining as AI native. So they have full AI implementation, to what I'm seeing is most organizations are still learning the concept of what AI even means. And then the second biggest misconception I'm also seeing is around AI governance. So there's a spectrum again where everyone is on the spectrum of, okay, don't put any data whatsoever in these LLMs, because if you do, it's going to be misused and abused, to people not understanding what it really is that these LLMs are using your data for. So those are kind of two of the biggest misconceptions I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. John, I'd love to pass to you as well to see your thoughts here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the biggest misconception, there are a couple of core ones, as Julianne mentioned, but the biggest one that I see pretty regularly is AI accuracy is primarily a prompting problem. Um, the hard truth is that most of these models, even the best new released version of ChatGPT, hallucinates between like 53 and 81% of the time. That's according to OpenAI simple QA benchmarks that they released recently. That's not just disappointing, it's disqualifying in many enterprise applications where accuracy, especially to a certain level, we work in high reliability industry looking at defense and intelligence and engineering, healthcare, finance would be other places. That's a non-negotiable. We have to have accuracy in these models, but the misconceptions sort of drive a little bit deeper, where I think people think in many instances more data equals better results. Throwing more information into these systems is going to sort of solve these problems in some sort of underlying capacity. That's not really true in many instances. More data, especially if disconnected, creates noise in the system. Another, black box is inevitable. Like, we can't do anything about knowing how these algorithms work, what they return, what they're looking at, what their operators are. It's unavoidable. And I think a lot of that's just sort of legacy system hangover for how we designed and sort of deployed machine learning solutions in the past. And we have sort of a fix around that as a company. And then the other big one that I see is sort of patches from a fundamental perspective, Band-Aid solutions like, say, general RAG techniques or chain of thought reasoning and prompting. And these things are sort of core to fixing these problems at scale. And in general, all of these things are ephemeral in nature. They're not persistent. And so when you do apply these things, you have to keep reapplying them, redesigning them. And there's no sort of persistent nature in solving that problem. So this creates a lot of implementation barriers. And I think in general, what you see is there's a bit of a crisis of confidence in the application in an enterprise perspective right now. When we go talk to customers, we've had a year of ChatGPT use, or just say transformer models being applied, and looking at all these things, and to varying degrees of success. But what we found is there are ways around that. There are ways to patch that. And I think it starts with the underlying data model. And if you can get that in the right sort of organized capacity, we use graphs. Graphs are the fundamental to and through when we engage models. It gives us a grounding mechanism. Whenever you can fix the fundamentals, the foundational aspects of what you're doing, you have a higher likelihood of success in application, especially at scale.
Thank you both for those answers. So now, Kari, that we've set you up with some doom and gloom, maybe you can save us a little bit. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to the TMMI framework within organization. So now, if we've overcome these sort of doom and gloom, and we've cut through some of these misconceptions, if you were to guide a new team through AI adoption using a TMMI-inspired roadmap, what would be the first steps you'd recommend based on your experiences?
Yeah, excellent question. And of course, to understand that, you need to remember how TMMI is structured. And basically, it says that get your basic stuff together, and then you can move on to more advanced stuff. I think to really simplify, that's TMMI. So if you look at TMMI's level 2, so that's really first level where you have some structure. It does say that get your test policy, planning, monitoring, design, execution, and environment together. And I would start with those basic things with it, in the AI context. So AI policy. Where are you going to use it? Why? What for? Discuss that in your organization and make those decisions. And then you should plan a little bit more. How are you going to use it exactly? Are you going to use it as is, which I would recommend, or are you going to use it as a partner for your work so you can make use of it, but you are not driven by it? So it's a good help. Monitoring, you would need to keep reviewing how AI performs wherever you put it. If it's to be assisting your testing, would you write the same stuff as the AI-enabled tool proposes? Or if you are actually testing a software that includes AI, when you would need to be monitoring different kind of stuff and what you would regularly be doing when you test some traditional software. For design and execution and environment, I just couple those together, and so in those I would be really starting from basics. How do you exactly are going to use which tools, which AI tools, Gen AI? Maybe you have some data, maybe you want to have your own model created that can give you more precise answers, and where, make sure your data is there, secure, unbiased, you have cleaned it up before you are using it for teaching your AI. So that's kind of basic elements, and then you are good to go, and you don't need to make guesses, if it's working or not.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through that and kind of pulling us out of this doom and gloom and what we can start thinking about if we'd want to begin to implement something like this. And so with that being said, I want to move ahead with the group to real world applications. And we'll start with the positives. So, Julianne, I'm going to direct this one at you. Can you share a success story from your work where generative AI made a significant impact? And so whether that was improving processes, enhancing creativity, or solving a complex problem, whatever that might be, if you could share with the group.
Yeah, that's a great question, Amanda. So a lot of the companies I work with are digital health focused, and so they have traditional AI in their product. But up until about a year ago, they hadn't really been using AI on the operations side. And then with this latest wave of the LLM models and the reasoning tools, we started to notice in particular on the operations teams with finance, HR, contracts, legal, that there was capabilities for these tools to do things such as analyze contracts, even build rudimentary Excel models, and even think through, at this point, do research on heavy business applications, like things such as what are the industry trends for revenue recognition for digital health companies. And so at one of our companies, we actually went through an exercise of figuring out how do we implement the LLMs to help out with productivity on our teams. And what we were able to do with that process was effectively leverage, for example, Claude and Perplexity to do the deep research tools to do additional research on very complex topics as we tried to figure out our different business models for these new and emerging companies, and build new research reports in that typically would have taken our teams probably about anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks before. We were now building those in somewhere like 2 hours. So what that was exactly. What that was effectively doing was it was freeing our team up to focus more on the strategy and how do we deliver effective value to our different clients, as opposed to spending a lot of time digging through online resources and things like that as well.
Yeah, so
Amanda,
that's great. Yes, John, jump in.
I'd love to, just because I have some hard numbers to share from one of our client implementations. There's two things, and I'll do it quickly because I know that I'm being additive here in the moment. We're working in the oil and gas sector, we work in defense, and we work in intelligence. And a lot of our problems are multimodal, multifunctional in nature. Whenever we look at solving things across a value chain, we have to connect that infrastructure, that information, everything around sort of a given problem space. And so a couple of places we started to play are forensic accounting, and then looking at operations, to Julianne's point, like how can we toggle the operations at scale for a business? And so for one of our oil and gas clients, we looked at a graph implementation where we built a structured knowledge repository and sort of a universal data model around the entirety of the accounting workflow, chart of accounts, contracts, price books, real-time operations, everything that's sort of going into that system in a single unified data model. And by doing that, we identified pretty quickly about $8 million in incorrectly processed invoice costs that had been passed through the system and previously approved. So there's ways to claw that back, but it wasn't just sort of applying it to that thing alone. It's the ability to sort of create connective tissue across the financial system and start to train different elements of the organization around financial terms, financial processes, how we codify things, and what that means for our ability to sort of understand this space more effectively as an organization at scale. And so real dollars, but also some sort of intangible impact there that's pretty substantial. The second is the operations optimization thing. We looked at, this company bought 8 other companies in the last 2 years. They received about 1,900 wells and about 3,000 assets at scale across all of Texas. And so we built a model around the entirety of the state of Texas, so that we could look at strategic implications on how we plan and execute work, but tactical implications on a day-to-day basis for how we can optimize on objective function, given cost objective as an example. In a strategic capacity, we were able to sort of avoid about $10 million in costs that would have otherwise been deployed because we didn't understand the sort of connective tissue around the day-to-day operations and how to toggle that more effectively. And then on a tactical level, just looking at owned assets in an operated capacity, being able to sort of deploy something where we can look at how we can sort of move things more effectively from one place to the other from a disposal perspective in both owned and contracted assets that each have their own sort of cost objectives. And that created around $7 million of value. So in terms of like total value creation for an individual client in a year, it's roughly $30 million plus or minus, and real sort of tangible value creation around how to use these tools and what they can mean for your organization at scale.
Yeah, exactly, John. It's interesting because it's like you go to each company has at this point, it's a unique use case, but it's really working with the business owners hand in hand with the engineers to say, okay, what do they need from a strategic value proposition? And then what are those, right now it's demonstrated cost savings. And then it's starting to move into how do you also use these tools for strategy? Because I am seeing it as well move into the boardroom and seeing examples of individuals like, for example, use it to understand how to analyze their board decks, how to think through, okay, what are those talking points that they can expect to come up from their board members, whether it's challenges, whether it's opportunities within the market. But there's hard numbers in savings, but there's also intangible value that's coming up out of using these tools on the operations side.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the last thing I'll say on this, the sort of connected systems, this is imperative. You can either take a relational database or databases that are disconnected at scale and try to manually engineer an outcome where you can create depth of connection within the structure of that. But usually those are sort of single mode in nature. You're taking a bunch of Excel documents and connecting them, or creating sort of a relational database instance. Whenever you use a knowledge graph, you can really sort of get rid of these independent silos and use a unified knowledge architecture that creates a holistic understanding of the value chain at scale and all the data that you need to toggle that value chain. that's a bit of an unlock whenever you start looking at cross-modal data enrichment and how you can use data across different pieces of your organization to create value.
So now that everybody, Kari, jump in.
Yeah, I have another viewpoint, which is new businesses that wouldn't exist without AI, and I think that's quite interesting. I'll mention a customer anonymously who are doing warehouse optimization, and optimization is a really crucial thing for AI. I think the gold mine for using AI, and I don't think this company would exist without AI, but they do, and they are doing really well. So I think those kind of opportunities are something we also need to be looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for pushing us in sort of this positive trajectory, because it's my job to now bring us down a notch and ask us again about the negatives. I'm like, John, I'm going to come back to you, which you knew this was coming. So I'll phrase it very nicely for you, and then you can take it how you want. So are there industries or projects that you're working in specifically where AI adoption has been particularly challenging? And how did you and the team overcome those challenges or barriers?
Yeah, I'd say we only focus on problematic areas. We're focused on high reliability industry in general. So we're looking at engineering solutioning, intelligent solutioning, where the cost of failure is significantly high. And the most challenging sort of implementation environment possible is all of the sort of workflows in those environments that are multifunctional in nature. You start looking at sort of defense or energy and power. Supply chain, to Kari's point, is a perfect example of where if you get something slightly wrong, it sort of a cascading problem, and the impact's quite large. But a lot of it comes down to core challenges around infrastructure gaps. First massive barrier we encountered was what I call like the infrastructure reality gap. It's this chasm between sort of theoretical AI capabilities and what can actually be deployed in these environments. And while industries talk about like the application of super intelligence and agents at scale and all this other stuff, we're still working in an environment right now that's inherently disconnected. And because it's inherently disconnected, without manually engineering the connective tissue within the structure of that entire value chain or that information environment, you're going to deal with persistent issues of either having to work around these things or build bespoke models that you can operate very specifically within the context of the workflow that an agent is executing. So I call that one. Two, the zero error tolerance paradox, right? You got like high reliability organizations, they're adverse to failure. They absolutely have no tolerance for it. And when we start to look at the applications to say like traditional RAG approaches or anything, you're 60 to 80% efficacy rates on conventional systems. That's just not good enough. Like you'd ask yourself sort of holistically at scale, what part of your business could be wrong 20, 30% of the time? It's hypothetical and a rhetorical. At the same time, the answer is none, especially in the environments we operate in. And to Kari and Julianne's point, a lot to do with security, compliance, encryption, and how we manage information. They raised these points independently earlier. These sectors operate under stringent regulatory frameworks, security protocols, make traditional cloud-based AI solutions in many instances non-starters. So we've had to build a zero trust interface that we can deploy in air gap situations that are completely disconnected with locally hosted models and data that can run on the edge without any connectivity. And so those challenges, it's like understanding the disconnected nature, having tools today that really don't align with your zero error tolerance, and then using security and compliance infrastructure to support the stringent requirements that you'd have in any of these sort of highly regulated areas.
Thank you for jumping in on that one, John. I'd like to switch our focus again a little bit. Now I'd kind of like to take it to ethics, transparency, which is kind of like a buzzword anymore, transparency, explainability. And so Kari, I'm gonna switch up a little bit and start with you on this question here. So generative AI, a lot of times we're viewing it out there in the wild as this replacement. It's a threat, whether it's to creativity or roles, things like that. So how does your organization frame AI that it's this collaborator rather than a competitor with the humans?
It's about starting from point of view of productivity, really. So how would you be more productive? And very often we question it. Well, I would ask somebody who already knows the answer, and I would work in pairs. And I think it's not that different with AI. You just need to think about AI as your friend, something that is there to help you be more productive. And obviously, it's not only on an individual level. You need to talk this same talk to the company management and so on, so that there is not going to be any misconceptions up there, so that they would be thinking about layoffs or things like that, which of course can't be. So it's about creating a culture of using AI as a helper, as a collaborative agent, and that's then hopefully things go right.
Thank you for weighing in on this one. Julianne, I'd love for you to weigh in.
Yeah, and I'd echo what Kari is saying as well. When I'm teaching individuals, whether it's executives or my team members on operations, or even people on, we have a very heavy, usually R&D team, about how to use AI in practice, I tend to analogize it to something they're used to. So like, for example, with Claude or Perplexity, at this point, it operates like almost like an MBA intern. And so when you explain it in that manner, it becomes more approachable. So like, instead of using the phrase prompt engineering, you remind people about, okay, well, we all had high school English. So how do you frame asking good questions? And then at that point, people, individuals start to understand, okay, they can do this too. So it's no longer about, I know most people on this presentation are engineers. It's no longer about being a software engineer. It becomes more approachable to somebody who's using it from a business perspective. And then once they understand, oh, they can use it too, then they're like, okay, they want to use it. And then they tend to start to want to partner with more technical software engineers and say, okay, how do I implement this in my business? Because it's really awesome and it can save me time and actually help make me more productive.
Thank you for weighing in on this. John, I wanted to keep this, keep it within the ethics realm, but I wanted to switch it up a little bit with you. And so through Data Squared and in like the government defense side of things, how are you and the team ensuring ethical AI implementation?
Yeah, look, I think I'll bookend the conversation that we were just having with what I'll lead into. Like at Data Squared, our vision is fundamentally human centered. Like we're here to build a world where people and machines make smarter decisions together. It's not just sort of a tagline or anything. We literally designed our platform for that outcome. And our core beliefs are you're not missing the data, you're missing the connections in your data that matter. And this isn't about replacing human intelligence, but about identifying things that human cognition alone will struggle with and using these things as a thought partner and a capability amplification. And ethics are really within this structure, not any different. Ethical AI implementation, it's foundational to our approach. We believe it's not just about good intentions. It requires deliberate architectural choices that prevent bias and ensure transparency and maintain accountability. Like you said, in the areas that we're working in, we don't have the luxury of being wrong 20% of the time. We don't have the luxury of presenting false data at any point. We need to be able to ground the answers that we generate from our system in the reality that we operate within. So our biggest principle is that we want to ensure that any transactional work that's done through our platform with large language models is effectively grounded in the data environment that's been curated by the customer for the problem that we're trying to solve. We can maintain an understanding of how these things drift because we have complete traceability. We understand exactly what we're pulling out when we query, the natural language contextual elements of it within the structure of our universal data model, how we subsegment that, how we pass it to a large language model, what is returned from that model, the fact basis of those returns, and what it means for the quality of the answers that are being provided. And from an ethical perspective, I think being able to ground all of your activities within the structure of a heavily curated and understood data environment allows you to mitigate what I'd say is sort of conversational drift within the structure of how these models operate and the returns that they can generate. So we want to start with a technical architecture that really prevents, at the end of the day, algorithmic bias and ensures transparency. And as long as we can ground our models within the structure of the reality that we're operating in, we can always fact check that basis. We can always understand the value of the answers that are presented, and we understand how these systems are working. So it's not just that it's a compliance requirement. It's really trying to get around some of the more thorny parts of how these models behave at scale, and trying to really effectively deploy something that can be trustworthy, transparent, and traceable.
Thank you for weighing on this one, John. We have a little less than 10 minutes left. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but what I'd like to do is pose the question to the group as sort of a whole, and then I'd love to get everybody's thoughts, starting with Kari, if I could. So as far as future directions, broader impacts of AI and generative AI. So Kari, looking ahead, how do you see generative AI influencing your organization and its sort of future strategy?
Well, first of all, I think that any company who does not make their own policies on how to use it will lose the game. They will need to take part in using Gen AI somehow. It doesn't need to be a lot, but they need to start. And for some companies, it will be a big disappointment. I'm sure they won't get the gains they want from Gen AI. And for others, they will be succeeding like you can't imagine. And I think that's really up to a little bit on the business context of each companies. So I think even in a year, max 2 years, we will see amazing successes, but also amazing failures. People who are saying that Gen AI was not for us. But I think that's also fine. But for those companies, I think it's also important that they start thinking, okay, how else could we use it? I mean, I've already seen companies who are getting Gen AI licenses for everybody, like, here's ChatGPT for you, but nobody advises at all how to use them effectively, how to do prompt engineering, what kind of questions to ask and what not. And shall we trust the answers like they are, or maybe we just use them as a raw material for our own answers and our own work products. So there's also lots of things going to happen next few years where people learn how to use Gen AI properly.
Yeah, I love that about learning, making this a learning experience, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, I'm seeing that a lot where companies are throwing out a lot of money on licenses. And to your point, there is no training surrounding it. So it's very interesting how that's going to pan out. Julianne, I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like we're at a tipping point of AI adoption where it's like we had the early adopters and now it's moving more towards like mass market. And it feels like the next few years, but AI almost moves in months instead of years, it's going to be around like this unlocking of data silos, and the organizations that lean into AI will really have this competitive advantage as they start to figure out how to use this unlocking of the data and help generate additional insights and figure out what they can do with it to give them a competitive advantage as they start to combine data across the organization and also across industries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your perspective on that one, John. I'd love for you to kind of take us home here on the future.
Sure. Yeah, a little bit of a different perspective. We're a platform company selling a platform and solution to folks. So as a platform company, we're focused on high reliability applications, talked about the domains we're operating in, but our perspective on how Gen AI is going to evolve influences our strategy. And we're not just adapting to AI, we're building infrastructure that makes AI reliable enough for most demanding environments. And our strategy is guided by the principles which I believe will define sort of the next decade or half decade, to Julianne's point, depending on how fast things are moving. AI is not going to replace humans wholesale, but humans with AI are going to replace humans without it. And that's a quote from one of our professors at Harvard, Kareem Lakhani, but it's not just a catchy phrase. I believe that's sort of an economic reality. And it's a reality because people are going to be operating on first mover advantage from an architectural perspective. Some of the things that you're going to be able to define as critical bottlenecks to scaled implementation through early testing, early adoption, and early activity is going to give you a leg up on your competition for scaled applications in a shorter period of time. Like, you're going to understand how to connect your infrastructure, to Julianne's point. You're going to understand how to contextualize your data environments, and what that means for you is you're going to be building a sort of lead over your competition. And that's really sort of, I think, fundamentally one of the bigger things and focus areas that I think are going to be influencing organizational strategy as it goes forward. But I think there are a couple of key bottlenecks. Trust as a competitive differentiator is going to be super, super important. Understanding when this becomes more ubiquitous and the applications are more at scale, we need to have trust and reliability in the systems and the outputs from these systems. And our roadmap as a company that's going to be providing these solutions is heavily weighted towards making sure that that's a persistent thing that we can provide as a differentiator for our people. And then I do think the size of the problem that you try to tackle whenever you start to find areas of opportunity are really important to right size. At the end of the day, you're going to have people that take blue ocean strategies to, combining an entire company's worth of data into a single repository. And at the end of the day, I think the more targeted you can be, the more problem specific you can be in how you curate knowledge environments around solving, or at least aggregating all of the inputs for solving a problem, is going to raise your ability to be successful at the end of the day. So, it's a couple of key things. I think the market will change, and it's going to be influenced by how technology evolves in the very near term. But I think the people that start now are going to have a really tangible and impactful competitive advantage in the near term, because they're going to work through some of these systematic problems that everybody else is going to face, regardless of how well informed and well built out their data environments are as a company.
Yeah, I think a key in what you said there is it's almost like us taking a step backwards now. And it's like, what is that? We keep hearing data is the new oil kind of thing somebody came up with.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what I'm hearing now. It's like, throw away Gen AI, all these fancy things in automation, and we have to take it backwards to our data. So with that being said, we're almost exactly at time. Any closing thoughts before I kind of close us out here?
No, I think I can say repeat what John said. Start your journey today. Otherwise, somebody will replace you.
Exactly. And I just echo what you said about data, Amanda. It's like basically garbage in is garbage out. It always has been. And so it's like get your data in order, and you'll be successful.
Last point. Organizations that are going to thrive in the AI era aren't necessarily the ones with the most advanced algorithms or systems. It's the ones with the most thoughtfully connected information systems that allow us to deploy these tools at scale. So focus on the foundational elements. You'll have a higher likelihood of success.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining us. It's been an amazing discussion with everyone. Just a note of sort of housekeeping as we close out here. You can definitely check out the bios of the panelists on the site, things like this, get connected afterwards, and hope to see you at the networking sessions later in the day. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.